Welcome to Code Sandwich Hour, a certified fresh event where we talk code and sandwiches, and it takes about an hour. This week's special guest is Benjy Weinberger. Welcome to the show, Benjy.
Hi, thanks. Great to be here.
So, okay, you've been in the industry for about 25 years. You've lived in UK, Israel, San Francisco. You've built some very cool open source technology, and of course, have a few hobbies and hopefully some strong opinions on food. And I'm going to make sure we get to all of that and hopefully a little bit more. But let's dive right in and start with the most important question first. What is the best sandwich?
This is the most important question. And I have two answers depending on how much of a purist you are on the definition of sandwich. So if sandwich to you is vaguely anything involving bread and fillings and, without getting into the whole is a hot dog a sandwich debate, then the best sandwich, and I say this as someone who grew up in the Middle East, is a falafel sandwich in a big fluffy pita full of the little chopped salad and some really high quality hummus and some the spicy pepper sauce and the spicy mango sauce. And obviously really fresh, recently fried, spicy falafel balls. Like that is just the best sandwich. If you are a purist and a sandwich, and only a thing that has sandwich in its regularly used name is a sandwich, then a Reuben is probably the best sandwich.
Okay, so let's go back to the edgy falafel answer for a minute. Yeah. And do you have do you have a favorite? Like, is there a best falafel sandwich that you've ever had?
Yeah. I mean, my favorite. Your taste very much gets set sort of in your formative years, and so there's a place. There are places in Jerusalem where I grew up that, for me, there's just a place in the center of town there that just has. It's probably not objectively the best anymore. It certainly isn't, because it's very sort of old-fashioned at this point. But to me, that is what falafel tastes like. And every time I try to find a falafel sandwich, that's the taste I'm chasing.
That's fair, but you can't. You're just not going to get back there, right?
A place called Maoz in Jerusalem. It may even still exist, but even if it does, that's not the best one anymore, objectively. But to me, that's the one. That's the flavor I keep chasing.
Yeah, it's got that. It's got that. Yeah, that indefinable quality. I don't know the history or the moment in time that you had that, I suppose.
A weird thing happened with falafel in Israel, at least in the late 80s, is I think because of the influence of fast food and McDonald's starting to come into Israel, is that they started putting French fries in falafel sandwiches, which is a big no-no as a huge purist, but it just doesn't work. But for some reason, I think the logic was all these fast food places are offering French fries. We already have deep fryers because we're making falafel in them. So why don't we just stick some potatoes in there? But it never quite works out. And that's, to me now today, the sign of a more authentic falafel places when they don't bother trying to stuff French fries in it. Because it's just wrong.
Okay.
It's just wrong.
Yeah, it doesn't feel right.
Something about it that doesn't work. And I am... I love French fries as much as the next person, but you don't stick them in everything.
Now, I've been to Middle Eastern restaurants where they're, and in the States, but where you can get the falafel sandwich with the more traditional ingredients, but then also get French fries on the side, and that feels less of a violation, right? Yeah.
By all means, just don't stick them in the pita. There's something about the taste that doesn't work.
Okay, now what about the Reuben? Because the Reuben is definitely one of my favorite sandwiches. Is there one that sticks in your memory there?
So Reuben style. So the thing about sandwiches is, and I've had arguments about this with coworkers a lot. Some people really like very dry sandwiches with very high quality ingredients. I'm more on the side of very wet, sloppy sandwiches that by the time you finish eating them, you've got a mess on your hands. And obviously having high quality ingredients is very nice, but it's not a must have. And so the thing I like about Reubens is that they get sloppy pretty quickly, but really any sandwich where there's some great, just like a big pile of sliced meat and some really sloppy sauce and maybe some cheese, and it's melting, and they all kind of meld together. And I was raised to eat kosher, so let's pretend I didn't say the thing about the cheese. And yeah, so those are great. And there's a place in San Francisco called Deli Board on Folsom Street. They have absolutely fantastic sandwiches in that style.
Okay. And with I find the Reuben to be a really interesting sandwich. I feel like this is probably a thing throughout food, but where even if you have this like really crappy ingredients, just like generally the Reuben's going to be okay. It's going to be messy. It's going to taste good, but there's this point where you can definitely tell, like if the restaurant made their own corned beef or made their own sauerkraut, that it's like it takes it up to this next level, and it's like two different classes of sandwich, I think.
Yeah. It's not that the ingredients don't matter, but if a sandwich is very dry, then the high quality ingredients won't save it. Like, to me, personal bias, sandwiches need to be wet and sloppy.
Okay. I like that. I like that opinion. All right. Let's go. Actually, going back to the falafel for a second, because we have a question from Steve in the audience, and I might not say this right, but he said, okay, so the base for the falafel, standard chickpeas, or is it fava beans in a more Egyptian style? Like, do you have a comparison or favorite there?
I like the chickpea ones. I love fava beans, are probably my favorite single edible thing on this planet. But I like them cooked, like sort of standalone, stewed in some way. I like to cook, and I make fava bean dish where the fava beans are more the star. I've had the Egyptian style of fava beans falafel. I do like it, but for me, it's sort of chickpeas is what it is.
Okay.
There's a certain style of like falafel. Obviously, falafel is a Middle Eastern staple that has sort of predated the state of Israel by a long time. But in Israel, has become very popular there as the country sort of assimilated the foods of its neighbors.
That makes sense. Okay, well, that was that got me, as always. I don't know why I start the show out like this. It gets me really, really hungry, but I'll stay distracted, and we'll keep moving. So what we'll do in the rest of the show is we'll move through a series of 3 segments, each with its own purpose and a punny name catered to our guest, Benjy, this week. So this week's theme is pants. And you'll all learn eventually why that is. I'll keep it a mystery for now. For those of you listening into the recording, these shows are recorded live on the first and third Thursdays of each month at 1 p.m. Eastern Time in the United States, which is 5 p.m. GMT. The live shows are then later syndicated on CFE.dev and YouTube as videos, and also in audio format wherever you get your podcasts. So with that, let's move into our first segment. And today, I'm going to call it sweatpants, or maybe joggers is the more modern term. I'm not really hip on my pants lingo, but the reason for this name is that in the early days of anyone's career, it takes a lot of hard work to advance, a lot of practice, a lot of exercise, and these are the moments where we really have to sweat it out. So what better pants to wear than sweatpants for this time in our career? Okay, so Benjy, let's get started by going way back to the beginning, the early years in tech for you. So way before Toolchain, take us back to maybe even to day one. Do you recall the first line of code that you ever wrote?
Yes, kind of. The first line of code I ever wrote was probably I was 13 or thereabouts, and I had received a home computer. We're talking about the early mid 80s. I'd received a home computer as a bar mitzvah gift from my aunt and uncle, and if I remember correctly, and it was the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, which was extremely popular in the UK at that time, and I believe mostly unheard of in the US. And it was sort of, it competed with the Commodore 64 and computers of that era. And it had a basic interpreter, and my interest in computers had been piqued somewhat prior to that. I had encountered those very early home computers for the first time and was sort of fascinated and blown away by them. And now I had my own. It had 48K of RAM, which is sort of an unheard of richness of memory at the time. It had a 4 megahertz 8-bit CPU, which was very exciting. And so, and it had a basic interpreter. And so the first thing you do is you write some silly basic programs. And so my first ever code that I wrote as a sort of 13-year-old, face to face for the first time with an object of fascination that would become, the thing I would care about for the entire rest of my life, was probably, I'm guessing it was 10 print Benjy, 20 go to 10. That's pretty much, that's like the
That's
hello
like
world.
the standard program, right? Yeah.
Yes. And then you just watch your name scroll off the screen forever and you're very excited. As dumb as that example is, I will never forget the feeling of power, if you like, of there's this machine that will do anything I tell it to. And the challenge is just figuring out how to tell it to do that thing. And like, it is a dumb machine that will follow your instructions exactly. And the entire trick now becomes formulating those instructions. And like, I don't think I realized it at the time, but that would become my career. It's like increasingly sophisticated ways of exercising that power.
I think what's really interesting about that is I 100% relate to that. And even I think early code for me was probably just some HTML or more web based, but I can absolutely relate to that feeling. I think a lot of developers can. But one thing that's really interesting is at least for me, it doesn't feel like it's been chasing that feeling forever. It's kind of like, that's the beauty of development, is you get to constantly feel that, because it's like always learning something new, always just trying to make something happen, and it can be increasingly more difficult to do that. But I think that's so interesting.
And little did I know at the time, so after learning BASIC, to really get anything out of that machine, you have to learn its machine language. And so I did teach myself at like 13, 14 to program the Z80, which was the CPU on this machine, the Z80 like assembly instruction set. And I sort of tinkered with, writing little machine language programs. And at the time, and again, with such a limited, by today's standards, limited machine, that seems perfectly reasonable. And the vision at the time was like, increasing sophistication in programming comes from getting closer and closer to the metal. Of course, today we're in basically the opposite environment, where it's like layers on layers on layers of frameworks on top of languages, on top of containers, on top of abstractions. And so you get further and further away from the metal, and the stack beneath what you're doing becomes increasingly complex.
Definitely. So did you it sounds like it really took hold. Did you stick with it? Did you study it in school, or did it kind of like fizzle out until you started your career? What happened over the next few years?
It was always in the background. And also, apart from my tinkering and programming with this machine, I used to play games on it a lot, which I think anyone who owned a home computer, like, spent a lot of their time playing games. And I wouldn't say it fizzled out, but it maybe moved into the background for a bit when I was in high school and had to sort of do high school things. We're talking about, again, the 80s, and so my high school didn't offer computer science as a thing you could study. And then, but I, again, always had this interest in it. And then because I was living in Israel, between high school and university, you have your military service. And so things get put even more on the back burner while you're doing that. But when I went to university, it was now the early mid-90s. And at that point, it was clearer that computer science was something you could make a living out of. It wasn't the sort of bonkersly lucrative industry that it is today, where it's very, very clear that this is a pathway to a successful and rewarding career, at least financially rewarding. But there was starting to be that sense of this isn't some obscure thing anymore. I think it may be hard for people who are so embedded in today's tech industry to realize that in the 80s through to early to mid 90s, computer science was pretty obscure, and working with computers was pretty obscure, and it was a thing that hobbyists cared about. But it wasn't that the tech industry had nothing like, I mean, it barely existed as a standalone industry. It had none of the economic or cultural power that it does today, for better or worse. And so joining it was not a foregone conclusion. But when I had to choose what to study at university, I went with physics and computer science because physics was a thing I was passionate about and loved and wanted to study. And computer science seemed like also a thing I really liked and would probably be a better career than physicist. And that turned out to be true. So I really picked it up again at university and have stuck with it ever since.
Okay. So then where, so you've made a career out of it. That's why we're talking today. So what was, where was the first point where somebody paid you to write some code?
So after I finished undergrad, I went on to grad school. This was at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And at that point, I had shifted my interest slightly to maths. My grad school work was actually in the math department at first anyway. And I needed a part-time job, and so I went to work for Checkpoint, which was at the time the most prominent company in the Israeli tech industry. They were the center of gravity for basically the entire industry. They serve a similar function to maybe Google does today in the industry. They were a big very early public company that hired loads of people, and everybody knew someone who worked there. And so I got a part-time job there, and it was great. And that was the first time people paid me to code.
Okay. And then shortly thereafter, was this around the time that, because you moved to San Francisco to do some work as well, right?
That's correct. So what happened was after working for Checkpoint, I went to work at first part-time and then full-time for another startup. And this was 1999, and I worked at that company for 3 years, and then the dot-com collapse happened. And that company, like most companies, started reining in their expenses, and they decided to stop their operations in Israel, and some of the engineers relocated to California, myself included. And the idea was we came for sort of a year or two for technological continuity for that company. But then even the sort of US side of that company got engulfed in the dot-com collapse. And so I found myself in the US. It had been about 2 months since I moved, and suddenly I was without a job. And that is when I got one of the luckiest breaks of my life, and so much of life is luck. And this is 2002, and there was only one company really prominently hiring in the industry, and that was Google. Google is a marvelous sort of era-defining company in many ways, but one of the ways in which they were able to be successful, and this is an interesting note for companies now in our current sort of bear market and challenging environment, is that Google was hiring when no one else was. And so they were able to sweep up a huge number of really, really great engineers in a period where everyone else was letting them go. They also got me, so they can't all be winners, but they also got some really great people. So I think it's Warren Buffett this is attributed to Warren Buffett, something about that the secret to success is to be bold when everyone else is being timid, and be timid when everyone else is being bold. A little piece, at least, of Google's rise was that they had the opportunity to be bold when everyone else was being timid in hiring and in other things.
Interesting. I
a
haven't thought about that because that was a period of a lot of growth for them, right?
And literally no one else was hiring. I mean, it was very hard to find a job. Other companies were collapsing. Companies were letting people go. So I think there's a bit of a lesson there for right now.
And so, okay, so I do want to fast forward to today and to move on to our second segment, but I feel like we should, let's, can you maybe, just so we can do that more naturally, can you condense the next, I don't know what it would be, 10 to 15 years or so in a few minutes? Because it looks like you've got some other pretty big names in your work history during that time period as well.
Sure thing. So I was at Google for 8 fantastic years. Got a little sick of the commute down to Mountain View, and also because I live in San Francisco, and that just got steadily worse. And also just felt like I wanted a bit of a difference. I went to work for Twitter for a while, and that's where I encountered met up with many of my current coworkers, and at Toolchain. And after Twitter, I went to work for Foursquare, and also wonderful company, wonderful experiences. I generally have to acknowledge that I've been exceptionally fortunate in my career to work with really great people at really great companies. And after Foursquare, I took a little bit of a sort of fact-finding break and tried to figure out what I wanted to do next. And that's when it was my time at Google where I had first encountered really sort of really interesting, great build systems, and a strong focus on not just on developer productivity, but on providing the tooling to enforce really good developer practices. When I moved to Twitter, I realized that outside of giant companies like Google, that area was still lacking, and there were people at Twitter working on that problem, and I started working on that problem myself. I brought some of that insight with me when I went to Foursquare, and helped Foursquare get into a better situation with its builds and with its sort of software development processes. And realized, we're talking about 4 or 5 years ago now, that this was a problem that I really am interested in and want to spend a considerable chunk of the rest of my career working on. And that is the problem of software builds and how you go from raw source code to a verified, tested, secure, validated artifact that you can deploy. And sort of that is what generally people refer to as build. And so that's where I am today, like very deeply embedded in that space, and just very interested in what are the processes and what are the tools to make our own profession more effective. So there are so many companies out there making software to improve the productivity and happiness of every other business function, right? There's software for HR, and there's software for sales, and there's software for marketing, and there's software for product management, and there's software for support, and there's software for sort of everything you can think of. But software development is also a business function, and it deserves, cutting edge software to make it better and more efficient and more pleasant. And that's sort of the problem that I am very interested in, partly for purely selfish reasons, which is I want better tools for myself to use.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where my career took me, and that's what I'm interested in right now. And so to bring you right up to more or less the present day, I co-founded a company called Toolchain that does work in this space, and we are the lead sponsors of an open source build system called Pants, which is where the theme comes from. And Happy to talk a lot
And
more.
your shirt, maybe. Yes.
And the shirt, yes, that is the logo of pants. It gets more clever the more you stare at it. Yes.
Okay, well, yeah, let's dig into all of that. Right before we start this second segment, one question, just because I'm genuinely curious, that you were at Foursquare during kind of like the explosion of that product. I'm just curious, since you were there for about 5 years,
Mhm.
what do you recall the growth that you saw at that company? Like, was it small when you started and large, or what did it stay somewhat consistent?
Foursquare was there was this initial sort of blip of growth, and it became very trendy for a while, and that did sort of taper off. And Foursquare is still around and is still and it's sort of pivoted what it is, at least from a business perspective. What I loved about Foursquare and still very much respect about that company is no one ever let it get to their heads. So I don't think there was a sense of, oh, we've got this, the beginnings of this hockey stick growth, so we should immediately go out and hire hundreds of people, raise a ton of money and hire hundreds of people. Foursquare really tried to live within its means. And when I was there, the company, in terms of headcount, grew from, I want to say, maybe 60 people to maybe a couple of hundred or something like that. That's very slow by tech industry standards, particularly at the time when every company that had any little bit of anything, any little bit of any kind of traction, was raising tons of money and immediately spending it. But that's also a recipe for collapse, right? That's a recipe for setting expectations so
Yep.
high that you can't live up to them. And Foursquare was good. I wasn't an executive, so I wasn't privy to internal conversations, but as a sort of insider who was outside that circle, it seemed to me that the company was good about living within its means, not spending money either on headcount or on perks in a silly way. The culture there was very sort of down to earth and sensible. There was no talk about we're changing the world, we're doing the rhetoric sort of matched the reality. And I always greatly respected that. And so I wish that company, I've always wished that company every success. It is I'm very proud to have been there and be associated with that team. Just really excellent people. And I hope they continue to thrive as they sort of figure out where they and location in general fits into the wider industry picture.
That's amazing. I did not know that they were still around, and the reason it caught my attention was I was working for really a small agency locally in Cincinnati, Ohio at the time, or at that overlapped your tenure there, and I just recall that being the more social use of it, and we had a handful of employees there they were constantly fighting over who could, I don't know if you could get like king status or something like that. Who's
Mayor.
ever checked into work the most? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, being the mayor of a thing was still
Mayor, that's what it was.
yeah. I mean, I still check in places. I still have the app and I still fight for my mayorships. It's that is not really what Foursquare is now as a company. It's about, I believe it's about location intelligence and providing that to businesses. And I think, they are an independent provider of that data. If you don't use them, then you're bound to like a Facebook or a Google or someone who has,
Okay.
other interests. Foursquare did not, obviously, in terms of, consumer impact, it did not become what Twitter did, or certainly not what like Instagram did. But that was a very, in terms of like the quality of the people, the quality of management, the generally having your head on your shoulders and your feet on the ground and not getting swept up in your own rhetoric, they were a great company.
Great. Yes. Okay. So yes, let's fast forward to today. Start segment number 2, which we're going to call cargo pants, because eventually we hit that point in our careers where we have enough tools we're carrying around all the time, and we need pockets. And as far as I know, cargo pants are the ones with so many pockets. We can put a lot of tools in our pockets. Okay, so like how? Yeah, can I hear the collective sigh through the
Yeah, you're
virtual
definitely not
audience?
forcing
Yeah.
this at all.
Okay, so all right, I want to talk Toolchain, but before that, what led right up to it? You said you took a couple years and did some R&D and took a sabbatical, and that's something that we don't hear a lot about. So can you tell us a little bit about those couple years in your career?
Sure. So I should mention that Pants, the open source system, got open sourced out of Twitter, and we were using it at Foursquare, and a bunch of other companies were using it. So it existed in the world before Toolchain.
Okay.
But many of the people who were involved with developing Pants and open sourcing it kind of helped me start Toolchain and currently work for the company. And so definitely the center of gravity around Pants is now Toolchain. But before Toolchain existed, Pants still existed. And I was a contributor to it and hacking on it. And I knew that I wanted to do something in that area, but I didn't know quite what. And that involved, so there was a period of figuring it out, literally in a WeWork with a friend who was also kind of between job opportunities at that time. And we were sort of looking for what is the interesting thing, and definitely took a couple of wrong turns and put coding energy into some stuff that didn't pan out. But that time was really valuable because it helped really solidify what we thought isn't really necessary in the industry. And, it helped it helped verify some hypotheses that we got also by talking to other people, talking to companies, etc. And so, yeah, and so having that time where I wasn't tied to an employer or to an idea or to a strong path was valuable. Now, I want to state very clearly that having the financial means to take a sabbatical is an incredible privilege and not something that most people can do. So it is not something to throw about lightly and say, "Oh, you should just take a sabbatical." I'm like, great, I still have to pay my rent. Like the sabbatical will not pay my rent.
Yes.
So I want to be very clear that I am not advocating that people take sabbaticals, as I am very conscious that that is not an option for most people. And I happen to be in a situation where I could allow it for at least a period of time.
Okay.
I am gainfully employed, so.
Yeah, I'm like, yes, maybe someday, right?
Yeah.
Actually, I have a question related to that'll come up in our third segment. So we'll definitely come back to the sabbatical. But yeah, so what is the differentiation between, or maybe what you could do is give us what's the elevator pitch for Pants and for Toolchain, because I'm kind of curious what the role of each of them is.
Absolutely. So Pants is this open source build system. It is in the spirit of systems that go all the way back to like Make in the 70s, and then Ant and Maven and Gradle, and now things like Bazel. It is essentially, you can think about it as a system that knows how to operate on your code as input. So any process, any business processes, anything you need to do where the input is code, this Pants is a system that knows how to operate on code. Now, the obvious example of that is building your code. So everything, and build in the wide sense. So obviously, if you're using a compiled language, then compilation is one of your first build steps. But this includes things like running tests, running linters, resolving third-party dependencies, packaging, publishing, code generation, if you work with any kind of code generation frameworks like Thrift or protocol buffers, tying all of these steps together and walking you through them and doing it in a way that is repeatable, secure, and fast. So the system like leverages excuse me, everything it knows or can learn about your code through static analysis to make these processes robust and repeatable and fast, because it can utilize things like concurrency, caching. And so imagine a situation where you have hundreds of unit tests to run, and every time you make a change, you have to run hundreds of unit tests, and it takes 45 minutes. But now imagine you have a system that is, through static analysis, capable of looking at your code and saying, well, actually, based on these changes, I already have cached results for these tests for everything, all but like these 10, because these 10 are the only ones that are actually affected by your changes. So I can retrieve, all the test results but 10 from cache, and that takes no time at all. And then I just have to run 10 tests instead of hundreds. So you get a huge amount of performance boost that way. These systems, because of how they work, Pants also knows a lot about your dependencies. And so it is also a tool for reasoning about the structure and dependencies of your code. So you can say, it looks like it looks like this binary depends on this library for some reason. Why is that? Like, what is the tortuous dependency path through which this thing got pulled in? It's the type of system that understands your dependencies, and so can answer questions like that. It can help you maintain and enforce sort of dependency hygiene and structural hygiene of your code base. And crucially, unlike other systems that require a huge amount of manually written metadata in order to do this, Pants infers all of this information from static analysis. That is, it actually analyzes your code. And so it is very dramatically easier to set up than systems like this have been in the past, because you don't need to spend potentially weeks or months writing what are called build files that contain a lot of this structural information. Pants also handles a lot of real world situations like dependency cycles and sort of hairball messes in your code base that often tools get defeated by. Pants was sort of designed to work in the real world. And Pants was also, I should mention, unlike I think any other system out there, it was designed with Python in mind as a first class use case. And the reason this is important is that in the last 10 years or so, Python has gone from being what I like to call fancy bash, that is like the little scripting language you use around the edges, to a predominant language that massive businesses are being built around. And part of that is because it is the language of choice for data science and machine learning, and every company is a data science company now. And it's also very popular for DevOps use cases. It's very popular. It's increasingly popular for building web apps. There are frameworks like Flask and Django that make it like a really good choice for building web applications. And so generally Python has become the industry workhorse. And I believe it is now the second most actively developed in language after JavaScript. And JavaScript is sort of imposed on you by the browser, so you don't really get as much of a choice with it. But people are freely choosing Python all over the place. Python also has matured dramatically as a language in the last 10 years, and there are incredible language features in recent versions of Python. And so we really wanted to focus on that. So that's what Pants is. Pants has a very active open source community. Pants, unlike many other systems, was not designed for a single use case or a single company. It has a very welcoming community, and we strongly invite people to just come hang out on our Slack channels, which you can find through pantsbuild.org. And that's what Pants is. Toolchain, to finish my long-winded answer to your short question.
This is great. It's great. Keep going. Yeah.
Toolchain is essentially the lead sponsor of Pants. As I said, Pants was spun out of Twitter and Foursquare, and a bunch of other companies were using it. But what we realized it needed was a corporate backer whose primary interest was not the build problems of one company, but the build problems of the entire industry. And so that's what Toolchain is. Toolchain is essentially, if you're a company that doesn't have its own build team, we are your build team, if you want us to be. That's essentially what we are. We are the build team for everyone. We have the technology, both Pants and a lot of proprietary technology that enhances pants, things like remote caching and tracing and dashboarding and sort of all the sort of enterprise type features that you might expect to speed up your builds and make them more comprehensible. And we have a ton of in-house expertise and skills and know-how in that area that are really hard to hire for. So if you're a company that doesn't have a build team or has a small build team and you need that expertise, that's who we are. As opposed to, a system and a technology that is open source out of a company and exists primarily to serve the build needs of that company. So there's a bit of a throw it over the fence mentality. Whereas for us, the open source community and all the different companies that are using Pants and using toolchain technology, that's who we exist to serve. And so I mentioned Python. We also support Go and Java and Scala, and Kotlin is coming up, and we're looking very deeply at JavaScript and Rust as the next languages we want to tackle. But particularly for Python and JVM, if we are like toolchain is essentially, Pants is a piece of the technology, and toolchain is essentially the build team for the internet. For everyone.
I like the way that you describe the relationship between toolchain and Pants, because I feel like that's a lot of there's a lot of nuance in there, but it's like this really, really important nuance in development that's been happening within the industry, and that you get these, especially with it. My world is site frameworks, or whether they're static site generators or whole site frameworks, that we've been seeing more and more of these open source tools out there, but they're like, yeah, they're open source, but they're completely controlled and completely backed by this single company. And so there is a community, but the community is still, they're still at the mercy of what the funded company wants to do. Versus there are other projects out there that are following this approach that you have, which I personally really like, which is we're going to sponsor it, but we're going to let the community lead this one product. And then it sounds like toolchain is more of a service offering that has some internal tooling and just very deeply understands Pants, and then can use that to your advantage for your customers without necessarily having this one-to-one relationship to dictating every feature that gets built into the Pants. Is that an accurate statement?
That's a very accurate statement. You put it better than I could have. The Pants community, so Toolchain is the lead sponsor of it, and we do a lot of the work on it, but there are many contributors and even maintainers, which is sort of our tier of consistent contributors who participate more heavily in decision-making, etc., who are not Toolchain employees. They are using Pants at their companies, and they needed it to do changes, or they needed to make changes to it, or they needed it to, they needed to add features, or they were just fascinated. And so there are very active parts of the community that are not Toolchain, and we encourage that.
And how does that work? Like, if you're planning new features for Pants, how do you make sure that what the community needs is getting considered as well?
It's a great question. So we used to do these, and we have now started them up again. We do these periodic sort of summits where maintainers and really anyone who wants to, we get in a room, or currently a virtual room, and just talk it out. And we sort of decide on what we think the priorities should be. Now, of course, it's an open source project. It truly is. So let's just take JavaScript support as an example. Like, it's a thing we want to do sort of generally. The entire community understands that this is important, we want to do it. But if someone actually came along, but we would prioritize that against other things. But of course, if someone came along and said, this is important enough to me that I will do this work, no one will stand in their way. Like, no, there is no power to say no. This is the project priority and it must be followed. I mean, I think many contributors and maintainers want to flow along with the general project priorities, and JavaScript is such a priority, so obviously the welcome would be even stronger. But like, let's give there's no strong demand for C++ support right now. But again, if someone came along and wanted to do it for their own use case, we would absolutely welcome that. And we would be happy to help with advice and sort of getting them up to speed. So it's a bit of a mix of people's personal passion projects or things that their company needs. And also, we do try to create a sense of, here are the community priorities for the next 6 months, and let's try and move together towards that direction. But there's, as with all software projects, there's always way more stuff to do than people to do them. So it's sort of rarely we rarely have a problem of people doing just busy work, right? That there's so much real work.
Yes. So like in a related way, one thing I was also curious about is, you said there was this very clear focus on Python, but you have all of these other languages you support. You're looking at Rust, you're looking at JavaScript, which, the story makes sense, but then a lot of times the practicality of adding this whole other ecosystem that you're agreeing to support in something that is that is an open source project with limited resources like that, can become a maintenance nightmare. So how do you think about, or maybe what I should ask, or like, what are you weighing when it comes to, do we or do we not support X, whatever that might be?
Primarily how many users want it, how useful we think it will be in the community, how much will it drive adoption. So JavaScript support is high on the list, partly because many of our existing users also have JavaScript in their repo, right? That's pretty common. Whatever else you're doing, you almost always also have TypeScript and JavaScript. So we try to, weigh like, how popular would this be? Now, I should mention, Pants is a very powerful plugin API. And so the medium and long-term vision is, if there's something that maybe doesn't quite carry enough weight to be in the Pants core as like a sort of internal plugin, or a plugin that Pants ships with, then it can be an external one that someone else can maintain outside of the main project. The reason we don't really encourage that yet is that plugin API is not entirely stable yet. And so having all those plugins in the repo, even though it adds a bit of a maintenance burden, also relieves a maintenance burden, because when we change the plugin API, all the things that affects are still, for the most part, in the same repo. Obviously, we want to stabilize the plugin API, but the reason we haven't yet actually touches on something you mentioned, which is, as we add new language support, we sometimes discover areas where we need to enhance that API in some way, or add capabilities inside the core execution engine, which is what the API wraps. And so, for example, we had Python support, and I think one of the reasons other systems don't support Python very well is that Python support gets kind of tacked on as this external plugin, but the core system was not really designed with Python and Python-like languages in mind. So there's this impedance mismatch type thing. But with us, when we added JVM support, we had to make some engine changes to the core APIs to accommodate the idioms of JVM. And so we're getting much, much closer to being able to stabilize that plugin API, probably add 1 or 2 more languages and we'll be there. But today, having that freedom to say, well, if we want to support Rust, if we want to support JavaScript, we need to tweak the APIs in some way to make those languages' idioms work very seamlessly with our APIs, then, we want the freedom to do that. So the languages we do support are all pretty different in their idioms. Python, the obvious case, and then there's Go, and the JVM languages, they're all similar among themselves. But what you want to avoid as much as possible is that kind of impedance mismatch where you have to squint to make one language look like another language for the purpose of working with your system. You don't want that if you can avoid it.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So
So I just like a couple more questions to close us out, so we can move on to our third segment.
yeah.
We were talking before the show about other that you were going to looking to adopt JavaScript, or looking to support JavaScript, that the popularity is kind of undeniable, partly because the browser forces it on us. So there are tooling systems out there like, or build systems out there like NX, and you can probably name a handful of others. And I'm curious, for folks who are listening in who might be more familiar with the JavaScript ecosystem, what would a pants with JavaScript support, how would that differ from some of these other tools that are out there already?
So I am personally not super familiar with the JavaScript ecosystem. I'm one of those people who's done a little bit of JavaScript in the past, tinkered with jQuery, stuff like that, but I'm not a modern JavaScript programmer. It's just not my background. And so I don't want to say anything that might be wrong, but generally, you can probably think of pants with JavaScript as somewhat similar to NX or to Rush or some of those. The idea would be integrated support for building many different things out of a larger repo. So imagine having a bunch of different web apps or a bunch of different like front ends or a bunch of different microservices, and wanting to work efficiently with them in a single, what they call a mono repo. I know like the NX folks are very bullish on mono repos. We are as well. Pants does not require you to have a mono repo, but it definitely, and it's useful in a wide variety of code-based architectures, but it definitely supports mono repo use cases. And so imagine being able to do things as I described earlier, like, hey, only run the tests that are affected by my changes, or only run the tests that affect this one microservices out of my many node services. Package this thing, but keep, in a way where I'm not packaging my entire repo, but only the slice of my code that actually needs to be in this package. Help me reason about my dependencies. But where Pants comes in strongly compared to maybe JavaScript only systems is it also allows you to integrate across multiple languages. So for example, build this JavaScript or TypeScript, say React front end, package it as an asset into this Python service that is going to service, and then put all of that into a Docker image. And run the Python tests along the way, and sort of, and then, deploy that Docker image, like publish it, for example. So, Pants, because it is multi-language, multi-framework, can really give you this single. So you can get to a point where, again, we don't have JavaScript support today, but if we did, a workflow might look like I've touched a JavaScript file, Pants automatically understands that I need to run the tests that are affected by that change, repackage that React app, rebuild the Python app that it contains, run that thing's tests, embed that in the Docker image, bump that thing's version, publish it, tell me which things I now need to redeploy because they depend on this thing that I have just that I just changed. So that's the kind of interplay that you get. And that's kind of where, that's the type of thing that JavaScript support would enable. Think also about things like remote caching. So Pants supports remote caching, which is a SaaS product that Toolchain, the company, provides. The Pants has the capability for remote caching. Toolchain provides the actual remote cache that you can use just as a SaaS product, where you come in the morning, pull all your coworkers' changes, Now you typically would have to rerun all the tests because everything's changed. Many changes have happened, but you don't actually, because your coworkers have already run all the tests at those versions, and those the results of all that work have been cached remotely. And so you come in the morning and run all the tests, and they all return from cache within a few seconds. And so your sort of 40-minute morning sort of, I'm going to get coffee because things are built, I'm trying to establish a baseline for the day, that goes away. You can still get coffee. I won't be mad at you if you don't. But
yeah,
you won't
but
need to be waiting for code to test and build while you do that. So that's kind of the big win here, is a system like Pants that deeply understands the dependencies and structure of your code, has many opportunities to speed things up. Caching obviously is one. Remote caching means that you're not just not having to redo work that you've done, but you're not having to redo work that anyone has done, including CI, for example. CI's already run all the tests, so if tests that aren't affected by your local changes, you should be able to fetch the results that CI cached.
Okay. Have you come across? It was like one of the points you just mentioned was that something like adding JavaScript support would mean if I'm also using Python in the repository, that we can orchestrate what we need to do, and these interdependencies and all of that. Is that a common scenario that you're seeing even without JavaScript today, or would you have one user who is using Pants for multiple different languages?
It is increasingly common that there is something plus JavaScript, right? You essentially have to use JavaScript if you're doing anything in a browser, right? The browser sort of imposes JavaScript on you, which is fine because the modern JavaScript TypeScript ecosystem is incredibly rich, and so it is very common to see Python plus JavaScript, Go plus JavaScript, JVM plus JavaScript, and you very often see three things, which is JVM or some whatever, Go, something like that, and Python, because it is still, whatever else you're doing, you're probably also doing data science and DevOps, and you want a really good scripting language, and Python, can be that. Like I said, fancy Bash, and then also JavaScript for the reason I just mentioned. So it is pretty common to see at least three.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, last question before we move on to our final segment. I've been wondering this for a while. I don't know if folks who are listening in also wondering, but why is it called Pants?
This is a very good question. I was really hoping you would ask it. So I should mention to all our listeners from the UK that, actually for those who aren't, to be aware that pants in the UK means underpants. And so this name has extra resonance for us, and I did not pick the name for that reason. But the true reason is that Pants started out in the very, very early days at Twitter, excuse me, as essentially a Python program that generated Ant build files. Like Ant was a very early JVM build system, and it had these ant.xml files, and it would generate, and so it was a Python program that would generate multiple ant.xml files. So it was Python ants, plural, and that got shortened to Pants.
Okay.
And the name stuck. Yeah.
That's quite literal. Yes. Great.
Yes. And it's a bit of a problem, as I said, in some Union Jack flying countries. It means underpants. Also, to say that something is pants means that it's no good, or it's kind of rubbish.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah. It is what it is. Git does not seem to have been hampered by a name that is means something unpleasant in British English. So if
so
Git
it's going to be it'll be okay. Yeah. Well. That's right. Okay, great. Well, yeah, thanks for that. That was really, really fascinating. Definitely different than my focus every day, and I think it was a great sneak peek into your world. So, thanks for that. And let's move on to our third and final segment, which I'm going to call shorts or short pants or whatever we call those wherever
Oh,
we're
we've
from.
done all the puns, trust me.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's come up with an explanation for this one.
Think about what we would call Docker support in pants. Just wrap your brain around the puns that go on there. Dockers being a brand of trousers.
Oh, right. Okay. This is they're endless. Yes.
We've done all the puns. Yeah. So shorts. Yes.
So shorts, yeah, because we're going to have, I mean, quite literally, short questions. This will be a series of 8 questions but definitely can skip any of these. And well, let's dig into it. So, question number 1: behind pants, what would you consider your favorite open source project? So, like, what's your second favorite open source project?
Which is a Python library for making command line interfaces.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So question number 2, came across that one of your hobbies is scuba diving. So yes. I'm curious, what was the most interesting scuba diving experience? So whether because of the location, experience, or whatever, what's been the most memorable for you?
The most memorable was a certification dive I did 30 odd years ago. So I've been scuba certified for over 30 years now. And it was on one of the certification dives at the safety stop where the dive master, just to see what I would do, so very quietly swam up behind me while I was busy looking at fish and turned my air tank off. So as you can imagine, that was pretty memorable because I was having like an actual dive emergency, and I had no idea he was behind it. So I literally thought my equipment had malfunctioned, and so that was quite memorable. Fortunately, I did the right thing. I didn't panic and pop to the surface, but I signaled to my buddy that I was out of air, and like it was a good lesson in that you never know how you'll react in a situation like that. And I was more calm in the moment than I would have expected. I would have expected to panic, and it turns out I was able to keep it together.
That would be memorable. So I take it that your equipment hasn't actually failed since then. Okay, this is good.
Rarely fails. This was a test to see how I would react, and yeah. That is my most memorable dive, not for any sort of beautiful fish reason, but for the reason.
Yeah, something bad is happening. Well, at least you know that you are like you're going to be fine, and if that happens again, so that's good.
Yeah,
hopefully, yes. Okay, question number 3. So, looking back, what would you say is something that you mentioned that you've gotten lucky a lot throughout your career? What's something that you maybe would have done differently, if anything?
Ooh, that's a really good question. What would I have done differently in my career? I honestly can't answer that well because it makes me start thinking about counterfactuals and where would I be, everything that I've done in my career, including all of the things that might be mistakes, have led me to the extremely happy place I'm at today. So I think I'm going to have to be boring and say that I wouldn't change anything.
Amazing. I love that. That's the best answer.
I've worked at such iconic companies with such great people that, and any tweak I might have made along the way might have perturbed that and had like more negative than positive consequences. So I'm just going to say wouldn't have changed a thing.
Okay. I love that. So number 4, I had originally written this as what is the best Mediterranean food? We already talked about falafel. So what if we just took, say, the loose sandwich definition out of there? Do you have another favorite Mediterranean food?
Oh yeah, hummus.
Okay.
Just hummus like served as a meal in the US, it's sort of treated as a dip, but
Mhm.
in Israel and surrounding countries, you eat it out. You get a big plateful of it, and you sort of mop it up with the pita bread, and you shovel it into your mouth. And usually, it might be served with like a hard-boiled egg, and all sorts of spicy sauces, and some salad and fava beans, and that is an absolute delight. And normally, you eat it early in the day, sort of breakfast, lunch, and it is, yeah. It
That's
is
it. Yeah.
is the dream food.
It sounds amazing. I've had like really good, fresh, authentic hummus, and
Mhm.
it's so much better than what I'm used to is just, oh yes, a dip out of a can for a party or something like that.
I
So
mean,
yes.
real hummus like that, fresh, has a shelf life of something like 4 hours. Like, it starts to taste funny. It doesn't go
Wow.
bad, it won't
Okay.
kill you, but it starts to taste funny just a few hours after you make it. So the supermarket stuff must be loaded with incredible amounts of preservatives.
Mhm. Okay. Um, so yeah, I have a follow-up coming up in a couple questions, but let's divert for a second. And number 5, okay, so this is one where this is back to the sabbatical. And the way I originally was thinking about this was thinking of asking you, like, what would you tell someone who says they can't break away? And you already mentioned um, that not everybody, it's very privileged to be in that particular situation. So I'm thinking, want to rephrase this and say instead, or ask instead, what advice would you give someone who very much values time off and would love to take a sabbatical? Like, how are they, what should they do to get there?
Uh, I mean, there are obviously the practical aspects of making sure you can afford it, and sort of planning and budgeting for it. And it's possible that your sabbatical involves other work. Maybe that's how you afford it, but it's not computer science. It's not sort of work in the field, or it's not work for a company. Maybe it's um, some other thing you're passionate about. Um, Yeah, I think other than that, I'd say you have to learn to like get over your own importance and realize that everybody is replaceable, and the company, the industry, the whatever it is you're working on will be fine without you for a while. And none of us are as indispensable as we like to think, and so it is absolutely fine to step away from stuff. Um, the Clearing your mind is the hardest part, right? Like, not constantly going back to it. But I will say my experience, it is not quite similar to a sabbatical, but leaving jobs has always been very hard for me. And I have tended to stay at companies for a long time, and by industry standards anyway. And part of it is this thinking, oh, I'll miss this. I will think about it all the time, because it's such a big part of your life for so long. But my experience has been is that, like, the day you step away, you stop thinking about it. Like, I loved my time at Google. I was there for 8 years, and I loved the people. And leading up to my leaving, I kept thinking, like, I will miss this so much. I will miss the people. I'll miss coming to this place. I will, how is it all going to work without having this thing that's been a part of my life for so long? And 48 hours after I handed in my badge, I was no longer thinking about Google, except in a sort of vague, sort of positive vibe kind of way. So it is very hard to imagine stepping away from a thing, but once you do it, the impact of it on you is far less significant than you think it's going to be. The act of stepping
Yeah.
away is hard. After stepping away, it turns out it is much easier than you think it's going to be.
100% have had that same experience, and also, I love all of that advice. The one that stuck out to me that I don't think about very much is that it can involve other work, but that isn't maybe your expertise or whatever it is. Often I think about, okay, well, if I'm going to break away for how, even if it's just a few months,
Yeah.
that oh yeah, well, I can pick up some freelance work on the side, but it's maybe if the freelance work is too tightly coupled to whatever I've been doing already, I'm not going to get the mind space that I need from that.
I mean, one thing that's really good for resetting your brain is grunt work that is not particularly challenging in the way you're used to be challenging, but typically is challenging in other ways. So I took a bit of time off when I was still at Google in 2008 to go volunteer for a few weeks in Nevada for the Obama campaign. And I was an intern essentially. Like I was like doing stuff with spreadsheets and sort of making phone calls and, getting food. And I loved it. It was wonderful. And like, I remember when I showed up there and I was significantly older than the sort of regional field director and sort of the people running that campaign out there were all incredibly young. And I think they looked at me thinking, is this old guy going to be trying to manage the show and tell us what to do? And even though, but no, you step into that situation and you recognize that in that world, they are the experts. You are the intern. Age doesn't matter. And I was extremely happy to do grunt work on that campaign. And it was actually fulfilling because it was, scratching a different itch, and I wasn't using my like computer science experience. And I would just, so that can be a way of disconnecting and getting some sort of brain sabbatical.
Love that. And then come back with renewed energy, right?
Yeah.
Okay, number 6 is a 4-parter, one that I thought was going to go away after the first time I asked it, but that the answers are so good, I keep it around. So four parts here. Okay, so you can take anyone to lunch, living or not. 4 questions are: 1, who is it? 2, where are you taking them? 3, what are you eating? What are you going to order? 4, what are you asking, or what topic are you talking about first?
Oh my. Wait, are they living or dead?
Doesn't matter. You get to choose.
Oh. All right. So I would answer this differently, depending on the day you ask me the question, because there's so many. But right now, I was just in the UK a couple of weeks ago, and I had the joy of making a pilgrimage to Bletchley Park, where I'd never visited before, which was where Alan Turing and all the other cryptographers cracked the Enigma code and another German cipher as well, the Lawrence cipher, and helped, win World War II for the Allies. And so I'd have to say I would like to take Alan Turing to lunch. I am currently on a bit of an Alan Turing fascination bender. So, if you'd asked me this last week or next week, I might have given a different answer, but today it's Alan Turing.
Okay, so where are you going to go then?
I think I have to take him to Delhi board because I want to see him I want to see this very proper English person eating a sloppy sandwich and getting filthy.
Yes. Okay.
Sauce all over their hands. Yeah. Sorry, I felt like I needed a sandwich call back here.
Yes, I love it. Bring it full circle. Okay, so you're probably
also, because Delhi board, at least pre-pandemic, I don't know what it's like now, was a lot of tech companies around there, and so its lunchtime crowd was predominantly tech people, and I would just love to point out to Alan Turing that like you birthed this industry that in a weird way gave birth to these sandwiches.
That's okay. That's great. I feel like you just packed the whole show into one answer. That's amazing. Okay, number 7, second to last one, and then we'll get you out of here. So, tomorrow I'm flying to Tel Aviv for the first time, and I have a free day at the end of the trip. It's a work trip otherwise. So, what's the one thing I should do during that free day?
Well, you should go to the beach.
Okay.
You should go to the beach. You should wear a ton of sunscreen because it is ridiculously hot right now over there. You should go to the beach. You should go go in the morning before 11 or go in the afternoon after 2 or 3. Like the sort of 11 to 2 or 3 time is just way too hot. But go to the beach and you go to the beach and you find one of the beaches where the waiters will come out on the sand and just bring you beer or bring you whatever you order, like straight up to your deck chair. And there are many great beaches in the world, and there are many great cities in the world, and but there are very few places that combine both, where you have like an incredible sort of cultural, dining, nightlife, music, art world, and also amazing beaches, right? Normally, you sort of have to pick one or the other, and there are a handful of cities in the world where you get the best of both, and Tel Aviv is one of them. So I would say you can't go to Tel Aviv in the summer and not go to the beach. The beaches are just too fabulous.
Okay. All right. I'm excited now.
Yeah.
Definitely gonna make that happen.
And they're right there. Like, you're never more than like 10 minutes from the beach in Tel Aviv.
Oh yeah,
The
perfect.
Tel Aviv is
Okay,
like
and I
a
think we're
long, thin city stretched along the beach. So you're
and I think we're
basically,
staying like right in the middle.
yeah, you should be pretty close to a beach. And then, yeah, and just eat watermelon on the beach and drink beer on the beach. And when it gets too hot, go find a hummus place and eat hummus. Yeah,
Okay. Sounds like a great day.
That is living the Tel Aviv life.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, definitely marking that down now. All right, number 8, last one, final question of the day. This is my second favorite question behind this best sandwich question.
Right.
What is the worst mistake you've made as a developer?
Getting my ego tied up in my work is usually where trouble happens. It's sort of a combination of that and sunk cost fallacy, where you become attached to an implementation or a piece of code because your ego is tied up in it. And objectively, the right thing is to get rid of it or rewrite it or do things in a different way. And you have this combination of, I'm invested in this emotionally, and there's also some sunk cost fallacy going on. I've already put time into this. And learning how to let go of all of that and be objective about your own work is a hard thing to do in any profession. Usually these types of conversations come up in the context of code reviews, and sometimes code reviewers can be a bit brusque, and sometimes code reviews happen in text on GitHub comments, and so nuance and smiles don't come across necessarily, and you have to be very careful about how you phrase criticism to others. And so the worst mistakes I've ever made, I think, have been around getting too wrapped up in my pre-existing emotional and time investment in things that need to go away. And learning the joy of deleting code. At some point you learn that is the greatest joy in all of software engineering, is deleting code.
Oh, yes, 100%. It's like you get that feeling of making something work, and then that's like very close behind that is, okay, cool. Now I get to delete a bunch of stuff too. Amazing. Yeah. Yes. Okay, well that's it for today. Thank you so much, Benjy. This was a ton of fun.
Thank you. Super fun.
So before we go, I know we talked a lot about pants. Maybe I was going to say this is a time I use for you can plug one last thing if you want. Maybe remind folks of the URL for pants or repo, or also how to get in touch with you.
Absolutely. So please come find us, the Pants community, and me personally on pantsbuild.org, and there'll be a link there to join our Slack. And we're super happy to hear from you if you have questions, if you have any interest, any sort of ideas around things you'd want Pants to do, any help adopting it or evaluating it. You can ask questions in our welcome channel. You can DM me personally on there. It's a very active, very friendly channel. I don't want to speak ill of other open source communities, but we place a very high priority in our community on being friendly and welcoming. And our general mantra is that there are no bad questions, only incomplete documentation. And so come by. And if you're interested more in Toolchain as a company, we're toolchain.com. And there's a ton of services that we could potentially be providing to your team, your company, if that's of any interest. And so swing by and say hi on the Pants Slack. We would love to hear from you.
Great. Thanks, Benji. All right. So that's it for the show. Thank you all for your support. We'll be back live on July 21st with Gift from Cloudflare. So from all of us at cfe.dev, thank you for joining us for this show, and we will see you next time.